The Force is light and full of shadows.
Before we dive in, check the link in the description if you want exclusive Timelines members-only videos you won't find on YouTube, all on our Patreon. The Mos Espa arena smells like burning fuel and fear. Both smells are familiar. Neither belongs to the boy who sits in the cockpit of a podracer he built with his own hands from stolen parts and borrowed hope. Anakin Skywalker is 9 years old. His heart hammers against his sternum. His palms leave damp prints on the twin throttle grips. Around him, the pre-race grid is a wall of sound. The crowd's roar bleeding down from the tiered stone seats above, mixing with the shriek of a dozen engines cycling through warm-up sequences, mixing with Sebulba's wet, contemptuous laughter from 3 pods to the left. The Dug's orange eyes slide toward Anakin's cockpit for exactly 1 second before dismissing him entirely. The sun is already punishing. The desert air above the grid shimmers in visible waves, cooking everything it touches. Anakin squints through the cockpit's open frame and watches the starting grid light array climb the pole above the arena entrance. Red, 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 waiting for the green. He doesn't notice Sebulba's man. The Dug employs no shortage of crew, and one of them moves in the shadows beneath the engine housings, small, unremarkable, doing exactly what he was paid to do. A single stabilizer wire. A single precise clip. The kind of damage that doesn't announce itself until the canyon dune turn, when the engine torque peaks and the cable separation becomes catastrophic. The boy doesn't see it. The boy is looking at the lights. Then Qui-Gon's face appears at the cockpit's edge. He is a tall man, unhurried in the way of people who have survived things. The sun catches the gray-brown of his hair and the calm behind his eyes. He leans one forearm on the cockpit rail and speaks quietly enough that the crowd noise swallows his words for everyone except the child directly in front of him. He says something about instinct, about letting the Force move through the moment instead of grasping for it. His voice carries the particular warmth of a man who believes what he's saying, not performing belief, but carrying it. Anakin listens. The boy's hands tighten on the throttle grips. Qui-Gon straightens. He gives the boy one last look, measuring, approving, something almost paternal in the set of his jaw, and then he turns and walks away from the grid. He has gone perhaps 4 steps. The white light comes without warning. It is not a flash. It does not strike like lightning. It is more like a door opening in the center of the boy's chest, and through that door, rushing in all at once, comes everything. A desert planet burning in an atmosphere of exhaust and hatred. An orange sky split by a volcanic mountain. A mask. A respirator. The rhythmic mechanical exhalation of a breathing apparatus that has kept a ruined man alive for 23 years. The weight of a son held in the moment of dying. The weight of being forgiven. 2 lifetimes hit the same body at the same time, and for a single held instant, neither one wins. Then, the older one does. The first thing Vader notices is the lungs, not the hands, though he will notice those too, small and unscarred, in a moment. Not the crowd noise, not the engine heat, not the grip of the throttles under fingers that shouldn't exist in this form. The lungs. Because for 23 years the respirator did the breathing for him, measured, mechanical, metered, and now desert air floods his chest in a single involuntary gasp, and he cannot. He cannot. The gasp becomes a second breath. His vision grays at the edges. His throat works around air that moves through it without resistance, without the hiss-click of machinery regulating every cubic centimeter of intake, without the sensation of borrowed life. Free the word arrives before thought does. He grips the throttle rail with both hands and holds it until the gray clears from his vision. His chest heaves twice more. Around him the grid roars on, indifferent. No one sees. No one is looking at a slave boy in a homemade pod when Sebulba's customized racer sits 40 feet away, gleaming like money. He breathes. He counts. He applies, with an iron that took decades to forge, the discipline that once let him stand motionless on the bridge of a star destroyer while subordinates waited for orders. The heaving stops. His hands are steady. He looks down at them. 9 years old. The skin smooth. No burn scarring from the volcanic runoff on Mustafar. No graft tissue where the suit's interface nodes pressed against flesh for 2 decades. The fingers are short, a child's fingers, ridiculous, absurd, and they are trembling slightly with adrenaline. He stops the trembling. He takes a breath, slow and even, feeling the clean desert air move through lungs that have never been damaged, through a throat that has never needed a vocabulator. He lets himself have 2 seconds. Just 2. His mother is alive. She is somewhere in the arena stands right now, watching. He files that. He locks it. He doesn't let himself look. The tactical situation reestablishes itself with the cold efficiency of a man who spent 2 decades assessing battlefield geometry. He is in the starting cockpit of a podracer. The Bunta Eve Classic begins in approximately 90 seconds based on the grid official's position and the crowd cycling toward the apex of its pre-race noise. He has Anakin Skywalker's body, which means he has Anakin Skywalker's reflexes, and layered beneath them, woven into every nerve ending, 20 years of piloting instinct that doesn't live in muscle memory but in something deeper. Something the Force carries between lifetimes. He also, he realizes, has Sebulba's sabotage. He felt the crewman, not saw, felt, the Force impression of deliberate, malicious motion at the engine housing, perhaps 40 seconds before the white light. A cable. Something structural. He doesn't look. Looking would telegraph awareness he isn't supposed to have. He extends his perception downward through the pod frame instead, tracing the engine connections with the same methodical approach he once used to check a TIE Advanced's flight surfaces before combat sorties. There, the left stabilizer wire, severed 2/3 through, clean diagonal cut, not wear damage. It will hold at low speed. It will not hold at canyon dune turn velocity. He could flag it. Call the grid officials. Stop the race before it starts. He does not flag it. Because Anakin Skywalker, the boy version, the terrified prodigy who woke up this morning not knowing if he'd survive the afternoon, needs to win this race to buy his freedom. And this crowd, this hut, this particular configuration of bets and contracts, and Qui-Gon's gamble on a slave's life, it only works if the race runs. Stopping it now unravels the bet. Watto gets suspicious. Qui-Gon loses leverage. He reaches into the engine housing with the Force instead. Not dramatically, not with any visible effort. Just a man quietly repairing his own equipment, and guides the severed wire ends back into contact. Not welded, not fixed. Held, he can sustain the connection through the race. He has maintained precision force work under conditions considerably more stressful than a Tatooine circuit. Sebulba's sabotage is now decorative. The grid lights cycle. Red, 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 red. He wraps his hands around the throttle grips and feels the engines vibrate through them. Twin turbines with more combined thrust than many ships he'd flown, bolted to a cockpit with no shielding and no safety systems worth mentioning. The kind of machine that kills its pilot, if the pilot flinches. He doesn't flinch. To his left, Sebulba revs his massive engines in a display of intimidation aimed at everyone on the grid. The roar is impressive. Vader files the Dug's exact throttle response, the slight over rev pattern that will make him brake late into the first canyon approach, and sets it aside for use later. Somewhere above him, in the packed stands, his mother is watching. Somewhere behind him, Qui-Gon Jinn is watching, with the slightly troubled expression of a Jedi who felt something shift in the Force and cannot account for it. He will deal with both of them on the other side. The fifth light comes on. The arena holds its breath. His body is 9 years old. His hands are small. The desert sun hammers down on a race that the galaxy will forget in a month. On a planet the Republic pretends doesn't exist. On a boy that no one is coming to save. He rolls the throttles forward. The green light drops. The engines ignite as one. Not the staggered, lurching roar of amateur pods fighting their own power plants. A single, clean surge, both turbines climbing to identical output in the first half-second, because he balanced them during warm-up, with the unconscious precision of a man who has spent more hours inside engine housings than most mechanics see in a lifetime. The pod accelerates off the grid in a straight, controlled line. Around him, chaos. Gascano's 6 armed pod cuts left immediately, chasing clear air. Odi Mandrell overrevs and nearly fishtails into the arena wall before correcting. Two pods in the rear cluster collide before they've cleared the starting grid, the crack of collapsing engine struts audible even over the crowd. And then, the field is through the arena mouth and onto the esplanade, the open desert flat stretching ahead, and everyone goes to full throttle. Everyone except him. He holds 90%. Not caution. Calculation. At full throttle on the esplanade, Sebulba's heavier, higher-powered engines will pull a lead of roughly 40 meters. That lead costs nothing to surrender here, on flat open ground where position means nothing. What it buys is data. He watches Sebulba's pod from behind, the exhaust pattern, the slight left drift bias in the Doug's steering inputs, the way he rides the throttles in micro-pulses rather than holding steady. Filing it. All of it. The desert screams past in his peripheral vision. The heat shimmer turns the horizon into liquid. The cockpit frame offers no protection from the wind at this speed. It hits like a physical wall, tearing at his goggles, his hair, the collar of the racing suit his mother stitched by hand. He registers all of it and sets it aside. Beggar's Canyon approaches. The canyon mouth is a slit in the rock face barely wide enough for two pods running parallel, and it arrives at racing speed with approximately 4 seconds of warning. The field compresses. 3 pods fight for position at the entrance, jostling for the clean inside line, and 2 of them clip rock walls on the first bend, sparks cascading off their engine housings. The crowd noise spiking as the near misses register in the stands above. He doesn't fight for the inside line. He takes the outside line through the first bend instead, which looks like a mistake, wider arc, more distance, slightly reduced speed through the corner, and is actually the precise correct decision because the inside line through this particular bend has a protruding shelf of sandstone at shoulder height that Odi Mandrell discovers with his left engine cowling 3 seconds later. The sound Mandrell's pod makes is not a crash, exactly. It is a structural catastrophe, operating on a tight schedule. The engine cowling deforms, the left turbine's intake collapses, and then the whole pod snaps sideways into the canyon wall with the finality of punctuation. Mandrell ejecting just ahead of the fireball. He is already past it. The debris field opens in front of him and he threads through the gaps with the particular unhurried precision of a man reading a problem he solved before it finished presenting itself. The Force doesn't shout. It doesn't announce. It is simply there. A half-second of foreknowledge that looks, from outside the cockpit, like supernatural reflexes. The canyon narrows further. The rock walls close to within meters on each side. The lateral clearance at speed is measured in fractions. He can feel the force impression of the stone passing at his elbows, the deep age of it, the compressed centuries of Tatooine's geological indifference, and he runs the throttle up to 95% and lets the pod find the line. This is the part a child navigates on instinct and adrenaline, corrections happening faster than conscious thought, the nervous system doing the flying while the mind hangs on. He isn't hanging on. He is choosing. Every input deliberate, every correction made a quarter second before it's needed. The canyon's geometry is not a threat to be survived. It is a course to be optimized. He comes out of Beggar's Canyon in third position. The Tusken Raider encampment appears as a ridgeline to the northeast, the sand brown of the rocky outcropping blending into the desert so effectively that most racers are past it before their eyes register the figures. Most racers don't know what they're looking for. He does. He feels the shooter a full second before the trigger pull, the coiling of intent through the Force, the particular stillness that precedes a Tusken marksman's release. The shot comes from the third figure from the left on the ridgeline. He drops the pod 6 centimeters below the shot's path. The energy discharge scorches the air where his cockpit was. The second shooter fires from his right. He rolls the pod left and threads between both shots with the same motion. Behind him, a pod takes a glancing hit to the engine housing. Not catastrophic, not yet, but the pilot will feel it in the throttle response for the rest of the race. He doesn't look back. He knows without looking. The encampment falls behind. The open flats of the Hutt territory appear ahead. The last significant stretch before the canyon dune turn. He is in second position now. Gascano somewhere in his wake. Sebulba still ahead. Sebulba runs dirty. Not as an accusation, as a tactical observation, the same way he would have noted an Imperial captain's tendency to overcommit his flanking fighters. The Dug has 3 standard moves. The side vent blast, aimed at an overtaking pod's canopy to blind the pilot, the deliberate lateral drift to force competitors into the canyon walls, and a braking feint on the approach to tight turns designed to cause rear-end collisions. He catalogs all 3 during the 2 minutes he spends running second, at a controlled gap behind Sebulba's exhaust trail. The canyon dune turn arrives. It is a hairpin. The geometry of it is fundamentally hostile, a course designer's cruelty, requiring a speed reduction that feels, at racing velocity, like the ground dropping away. The normal line through the turn is a late-break, tight-apex approach that shaves the inside marker within centimeters. Most racers have spent years learning this turn's particular personality. He has spent those years learning things considerably more dangerous. He brakes early, fractionally early, not from timidity, but because the early brake lets him apex later, carry more speed out of the turn's exit, and arrive at the straight beyond it with a velocity advantage that compounds over the remaining distance. Sebulba doesn't brake early. Sebulba runs the turn the way Sebulba always runs it, maximum aggression, late brake, relying on his pod's superior engine mass to muscle through the exit. For 11 years it has worked. It works again today. But the exit speed is slightly less than it could be, and the gap between them by the time they hit the straight is 3 meters. 3 meters is enough. He brings the throttle to full for the first time in the race. The twin engines respond the way they always have, not with the flashy, over-revved shriek of Sebulba's power plant, but with a deep climbing note that feels structural, felt in the chest more than heard with the ears. The gap closes. Sebulba's pod fills his forward view. Sebulba's sensors register the overtake, and the Dug's response is immediate and predictable, the side vent blast, routed at the overtaking cockpit. He drops 6 inches below the blast's angle and completes the overtake in the same motion. Clean and final, sliding past Sebulba's left engine housing with clearance a person couldn't stand in. First position. The arena comes back into view on the lap's return leg, the stone tiers above, the crowd's noise rebuilding as the leaders appear on the approach, and he is running clean at the front with both engines perfectly balanced. The severed stabilizer wire held in the force with the same unconscious effort a person uses to keep their balance walking. 1 lap. He crosses the timing beam. The crowd erupts. He hears it distantly, the way he used to hear bridge crews celebrating battle victories. Present, acknowledged, irrelevant to the next decision. The next decision is the Tuscan ridgeline on lap 2, where the third shooter, the one who held off firing on lap 1, will try the angle his first 2 colleagues missed. He has already calculated the dodge. He brings the pod through the arena exit, back onto the esplanade, and opens the throttle. The desert rushes past. The twin suns press down without mercy. Behind him, Sebulba is 17 seconds back and furious about it in whatever way a Dug processes fury. Ahead, 2 laps of Tatooine remain. He runs them. The arena erupts when he crosses the finish line. He feels it before he hears it, the crowd's noise hitting a register that moves through the cockpit frame and into his sternum 50,000 voices, compressing into a single physical force. He brings the throttle back. The engines drop from their racing note to a low idle, and the pod decelerates across the cool-down strip, with both turbines still perfectly balanced. The severed stabilizer wire held until the last possible moment and then released. Its job finished. The race already won. He lets it go. The wire separates cleanly inside the engine housing. No one will ever know it was held. He guides the pod toward the pit lane and kills the engines. The silence that follows is relative. The crowd is still roaring. The announcer's voice cutting through in bursts of huddas he doesn't bother parsing. But inside the stopped cockpit, with the turbines cooling and the desert heat pressing back in, it is quiet enough to think. He sits for 3 seconds before climbing out. 3 seconds to be, privately and without performance, the man who just won his freedom on a planet that doesn't believe in it. Then he swings his legs over the cockpit rail and drops to the sand. Jar Jar Binks reaches him first, which is not strategically ideal, but also not a threat. The Gungan's celebration is physical, enthusiastic, and structured entirely around his own emotional experience of the last 20 minutes. Which is fine. He receives it with the patient composure of a man who has endured considerably more effusive subordinates. Padmé is beside him. Not handmaiden Padmé, the version the boy knew from a morning's acquaintance and a shared meal, but her, underneath, the one who will one day stand in front of the Galactic Senate and demand justice with a voice that doesn't shake. He sees it the way a man who knows the ending reads the first chapter, the particular set of her jaw, the intelligence behind the careful deference. He gives her a smile that belongs to the boy. She returns it with the warmth of someone who rooted for the underdog and watched him win. Then Qui-Gon is there. The Jedi is moving at a walk, but there is purpose in it. The same unhurried intensity the man carries everywhere, the quality of someone who is always exactly as fast as the situation requires, never faster, never more. He reaches the pod and looks at Anakin with an expression that contains several things at once: relief, satisfaction, and something else. Something quieter. A slight narrowing around the eyes that isn't suspicion, but is adjacent to it. The Force ripple. He felt something during the race. He hasn't processed it yet, hasn't named it, but the Jedi's instincts are working. "Well done," Qui-Gon said. The words are simple. The weight behind them is not. He is talking about more than the race, and they both know it, though Qui-Gon doesn't yet understand the full dimensions of what he's acknowledging. "I had good engines," he replied. The Jedi's eyes hold for a beat longer than they need to. Then he nods, once, and the moment moves on, because Watto is descending on them from the direction of the betting area, and Watto's mood is a meteorological event with commercial consequences. The Toydarian arrives with his wings working hard, and his expression arranged into something that is trying to be gracious and landing closer to bilious. Watto has lost badly today. The specific arithmetic of how badly is visible in the way he carries his body, the wings beating a fraction faster than usual, the habitual merchant's calculation behind his eyes replaced by a simpler, rawer emotion. He has lost a pod. He has lost his best pilot. He has lost the bet Qui-Gon structured with deliberate surgical precision, and the Toydarian slave broker's instinct for exploitation is, for the first time in recent memory, pointed at a situation it cannot exploit. "You did it," Watto said. The Huddies came through clipped and minimal. "I did," he agreed. The exchange of documents takes 4 minutes. Qui-Gon handles the legal language. The freedom certificate that emerges from Watto's grudging compliance is a standard Tatooine emancipation form, machine-printed on cheap flimsy, witnessed by a Hutt court official who is already moving toward the next administrative obligation before the ink is dry. The most significant piece of paper in Anakin Skywalker's life looks exactly like bureaucratic refuse. He takes it with both hands, reads it once. Every word, even the boilerplate, even the jurisdictional references to Hutt space slave law. Reads it the way a man who spent 20 years imprisoned reads the documentation of his release, with the specific, private intensity of someone who is not going to let the moment pass unmarked, even if no one else in the vicinity understands why. He folds it carefully and puts it in his pocket. The boy's mother, Qui-Gon said to Watto, with the pleasant, immovable tone of a man identifying the next item on an agenda. Watto's wings stuttered. That was not the bet. No, Qui-Gon agreed. It was not. The negotiation that follows is neither quick nor comfortable, and he does not intervene in it. He stands slightly apart from the exchange, watching Watto's hands, watching the Toydarian's eyes track between Qui-Gon and the official documentation and the Hutt court witness who has not quite left yet. Calculating. Always calculating. Because Watto's entire survival mechanism is calculation. He lets the negotiation run. Qui-Gon is good at this. Better than most Jedi, who tend toward a certain blunt earnestness in commerce that Tatooine vendors read immediately and price accordingly. Qui-Gon understands leverage. What Qui-Gon doesn't have is the engineering schematic of Watto's shop systems that lives in his memory like a blueprint. He waits until Watto's third refusal, the one where the Toydarian's posture shifts from bargaining to genuine entrenchment, and then he speaks. "The left manifold on your spare T-14 hyperdrive," he said. "The crack in the housing. You've been patching it with bonding compound for about 3 months. Watto's wings stopped for exactly 1 beat. "I can fix it," he continued. "Properly. A full manifold replacement using parts you already have in the back inventory. 3 hours of work." He paused. "That's worth a second emancipation document." The silence stretched. Watto looked at him with the expression of someone recalculating a problem whose variables have changed. The merchant in him was doing arithmetic. The manifold had been a source of low-grade anxiety for months, a repair he couldn't fully address because the qualified mechanics who could do it properly didn't come to Mos Espa, and the ones who did charged more than the hyperdrive unit was worth. "You know hyperdrives," Watto said. "Skeptical, testing. I built my pod's engines from scrap," he replied. "A T-14 manifold is considerably less complicated." This was true in a way that the Toydarian couldn't fully evaluate. The boy's hands had built those engines with his mother's help over 2 years of careful salvage work. The man's mind behind those hands had maintained the engineering systems of a superstar destroyer. 4 hours, Watto said finally. "You fix it in 4 hours, in my shop, today, before you leave." 3, he said. 3.5. "Done. The shop is quieter than the arena. The shade is a physical relief after the grid's direct sun exposure. He works at the manifold housing with the focused, economical movements of someone for whom this particular task occupies approximately 4% of his actual capability. Finding the cracked housing section, sourcing the replacement plate from the back inventory exactly where he knew it would be, fitting the new seal with a precision that leaves no gaps and requires no compound." His mother stands in the doorway. She has been there for 6 minutes. He is aware of her the way he has been aware of her since the race ended. A specific, located presence in the Force. Warm and unguarded in the way of someone who hasn't learned to wall themselves off yet. Shmi Skywalker. Alive, standing in a doorway with her hands folded in front of her, and her eyes tracking every movement he makes with an expression that contains things no child is supposed to put in their mother's face. He doesn't stop working. He finishes the seal fitting before he speaks. "The manifold will hold now," he said, without turning. "Indefinitely if he doesn't run the drive past rated output." Ani, her voice. He set the tool down. He turned. She was crossing the shop before either of them made a decision about it. Or perhaps she made it. Perhaps it was always going to be her who moved first. Because Shmi Skywalker has always understood things her son was still learning to name. She wrapped her arms around his shoulders and he felt, through the body of a 9-year-old boy, the specific weight of a mother who has been afraid for a very long time and is, right now, less afraid than she has been in years. "You won," she said. He closed his eyes. "We won," he said. The freedom certificate was in his pocket. Watto was already reviewing his manifold repair with the professional suspicion of a merchant who cannot find a flaw but is looking for one. Outside, Qui-Gon was waiting. None of that was the point right now. He stood in the shop and let his mother hold him, and breathed the desert air that moved through his lungs without restriction, without machinery, without the weight of a different life pressing down on every inhale. He breathed. The sandstorm arrives without courtesy. It builds on the southern horizon over the course of 20 minutes, a brown wall climbing from the desert floor to the upper atmosphere, consuming the landscape behind it with the patient. Total indifference of a natural force that has been doing this for longer than Mos Espa has existed. By the time it reaches the outskirts of the city, the light has gone from gold to ochre to a flat, directionless amber that makes every shadow disappear. He is 3 blocks from Watto's shop when the first gust hits. The sand comes horizontally, fine as powder, finding every gap in clothing and goggles with the practiced efficiency of something that has been infiltrating Tatooine architecture for millennia. Around him, the street empties in the practiced 30-second evacuation of people who have lived through this before. Stall coverings snap down. Doors seal. The city folds itself inward and waits. He pulls his goggles down and keeps walking. Qui-Gon had found shelter in a side street, hood up, one hand braced against a Durasteel wall panel as the wind built. Padmé was beside him, and Jar Jar had compressed himself into a doorway with the specific misery of someone whose homeworld is entirely water. R2-D2 had sealed his photoreceptors and locked his drive wheels and was simply enduring. He reached them at a walk. Qui-Gon looked at him the way the Jedi had been looking at him since the race, with the expression of a man checking his instruments and finding readings he doesn't have a reference frame for. Not suspicion, not alarm. Something more careful than either. "We need shelter," Qui-Gon said. "I know a place," he replied. He did know a place. He had always known this place, the specific, cramped warmth of his mother's home, which in this moment contained his mother, and would therefore contain the particular complication he had been managing since the race ended. The complication of being in close quarters with people whose attention was becoming inconvenient. But the storm was building, and the alternatives were worse, and so he led them through the emptying streets, with the unhurried confidence of a child who knows his city, which he was, and a man who knows how all of this ends, which he also was. The house is small in the way that Tatooine slave quarters are always small, space being a resource allocated by those who own it to those who don't, and the allocation reflecting the relationship precisely. 2 rooms. A cooking area. A work table covered in components his mother has sorted and catalogued with the meticulous care of someone who understands that nothing on this planet is replaceable. C-3PO stood in the corner. The droid had no outer casing, no plating of any kind, only exposed wiring running along both arms and across the torso. The internal mechanism visible in full, the vocabulator housing bare and functional, without cosmetic cover. He looked at it with the specific private knowledge of a man who had spoken to this droid 10,000 times across 2 decades, and was now looking at it in a state of incompletion he had never seen in person. There was something disorienting about it that he didn't allow himself to examine too closely. 3PO rotated toward the newcomers. "Hello," the droid said, with the particular mixture of uncertainty and compulsive hospitality that would define the unit for the next several decades. "I am C-3PO, Human-Cyborg Relations. I am not entirely complete, as you can see, but I am functional in most relevant respects." "He's wonderful," Padmé said with genuine warmth. "He is," he agreed, and meant it in a way no one in the room could fully understand. Shmi prepared food. The storm pressed against the exterior walls with a sound like sustained static, and the temperature inside climbed as the heating unit compensated for the sand-driven cold outside. The 7 of them, his mother, Qui-Gon, Padmé, Jar Jar, R2, 3PO, and himself, arranged themselves in the cramped space with the unconscious choreography of people who understand small rooms. Qui-Gon positioned himself near the door. Not obviously. Not in a way that announced itself as tactical, but the Jedi's back was never fully to any entrance, and his eyes moved through the room at intervals that weren't casual. A man who had spent 30 years assessing threat environments recognized the habit immediately. They ate. The food was simple, whatever his mother had, and she served it with the focused attention she gave everything, which was the same quality of attention that had kept a slave household functional for 9 years on essentially nothing. He watched her move through the small kitchen space and kept his expression in the register of a child watching his mother cook. The conversation moved. Padmé drew Shmi out about Tatooine, about the life here, with the specific skill of someone who has spent time learning how to make people feel heard. His mother responded with a careful openness, the calibrated honesty of someone who has learned to trust slowly and is choosing, with this particular young woman, to trust slightly more than usual. He listened. He ate. He let the room breathe. Then Qui-Gon set down his cup and looked at him across the table. "Tell me about the race," the Jedi said. Not the race. The question behind the race. The gap between what a 9-year-old prodigy could do and what he had done, and Qui-Gon's instruments had been registering that gap since the starting grid. He looked back at the Jedi and chose his words with the care of a man constructing something load-bearing. "I could feel the track," he said, "where the turns were going to go, where the other pilots were going to be." He paused, calibrating. "Is that the Force?" The question was genuine. It was also strategically the correct question, because it was the question Anakin Skywalker would ask, and it oriented Qui-Gon's attention toward the explanation rather than the anomaly. The Jedi's expression shifted toward something warmer, more comfortable, a man who has found a framework for the unfamiliar. "It is," Qui-Gon said. "Yes, the blood test happened after dinner. He had been expecting it." The med pack came out of Qui-Gon's satchel, with the casual efficiency of a man who had been planning this since the race, and the request was framed as routine. A simple health check, entirely standard for a potential Jedi candidate. And it was of course neither. He extended his finger. The pinprick was nothing. The wait was 3 seconds. Qui-Gon looked at the reading with an expression that was very carefully not an expression. Over 20,000, Qui-Gon said, quietly, not to anyone in the room, to himself. Is that good? He asked. The Jedi looked up. The careful not an expression was back. It is extraordinary, Qui-Gon said. The highest count ever recorded. This was also true of the boy whose body he inhabited, and the man whose soul had ridden in to occupy it. What the midi-chlorians were counting now, he suspected, was something the test had never been designed to measure. His mother was watching from the kitchen area. Her face was still. She had heard this before, heard it from Jedi who came through Mos Espa, whispers about her son, about what he might be. The hope and the fear of it had lived in her expression for years, both things at once, and he saw both of them now. What does it mean? She asked. Her voice was steady. It means he should come with us to Coruscant, Qui-Gon said. To be evaluated by the Council. The storm continued outside. The walls held. He looked at his mother and she looked at him, and the conversation that passed between them in that look covered more ground than words would have. He saw her understand something. Not all of it, not the dimensions he couldn't give her, but the shape of it. That her son was leaving, that the leaving was necessary, that she trusted him to come back. Only him? She said. For now, Qui-Gon said. Her hands folded in front of her, the same posture as the doorway of Watto's shop, her composure, her specific kind of strength, the one she had been building for years out of the only materials Tatooine had given her. Then you should go, she said to him. He stood. He crossed to her. He took her hands in both of his, the boy's small hands, the man's intent, and held them for a moment that he didn't time and didn't rush. I'll come back, he said. Not a promise deployed for comfort. A statement of operational intent from a man who had spent his first life failing to save her, and was now in the specific, unprecedented position of being able to keep the words true. She held his hands. She nodded once. Outside, the storm had begun to thin at its edges. The amber light through the window shifted fractionally toward gold. Somewhere on the other side of the wall, the desert was reassembling itself after the disruption, the way it always did. Patient, total, unchanged. He let her hands go. The room was quiet. Qui-Gon was watching him again with that careful, instrument-checking expression. He met the Jedi's eyes and held them, steady and clear. The next part was Coruscant. Coruscant from above looks exactly as he remembers it. The planet city spreads in every direction to the horizon and beyond, layer upon layer of infrastructure ascending from foundations so deep no one alive has seen the original surface. From the transport's viewport it presents as a geometric tapestry. Towers and transit lanes and the running lights of 10,000 vessels moving in coordinated streams through assigned corridors, the whole thing operating with the precision of a machine that has been running so long it no longer requires operators. He watches it through the viewport with his hands in his lap. Padmé is beside him, watching the same view with the focused attention of someone cataloging intelligence. Qui-Gon is across the cabin, reviewing something on a datapad with the particular stillness of a man composing arguments. The hyperdrive hum that carried them from Tatooine has dropped to the lower register of atmospheric entry, and the transport rocks, once, gently, as the pilot corrects for a crosswind above the upper city. A 9-year-old seeing Coruscant for the first time should be at the viewport with his face against the transparent steel. He sits back from it. He watches it with the measured attention of a man who has seen it burn. The Jedi Temple rises from the upper city's geometric landscape as it always has. 5 spires. The central one taller than the surrounding 4. The whole structure a monument to institutional permanence that has been cultivating that particular impression for thousands of years. From the landing approach it catches the afternoon light on its upper surfaces and holds it, the pale stone going briefly gold before the transport banks and the angle changes. He has walked those corridors 10,000 times. He walked them as a student, as a knight, as a master, as the man who came back with a red blade and ended what the temple had been. He carries the memory of that last visit, with the particular weight of something that defines you, regardless of whether you choose to carry it. It is always there. The weight of what he was. The transport sets down on the public landing tier. He picks up his bag and follows Qui-Gon toward the temple entrance, and his face does what faces do when 9-year-olds see things for the first time. The council chamber is at the apex of the central spire. He has sat in that chamber in two capacities, as the supplicant and as the seated, and both carry their own specific discomfort. Today he stands in the center of the circular room with 12 seats arranged around him and 12 Jedi Masters occupying them, and the afternoon light comes through the curved transparent steel panels and does what the outline suggests it should do to the stone floor. He looks at each face in turn. Mace Windu. Adi Mundi. Plo Koon. Adi Gallia, the others, their names arriving with the automatic recall of a man who spent years in rooms with them. And at the far arc, in the seat that carries the most weight in the least space, Yoda. The ancient master sits with his hands folded over his Geimer stick and his eyes on Anakin with an attention so complete and so still that it occupies the room the way a structural element does, present. Load-bearing, impossible to ignore. He is 900 years old and every one of them is in the quality of that gaze. He meets it. He doesn't look away and he doesn't perform the nervous adjustment a child would make under that scrutiny. He holds the contact for a beat and then lets his eyes move. Naturally, to the next face in the circle. Yoda's head tilts approximately 2 degrees. The questions begin with Mace Windu, which is fitting. Mace's register is direct, declarative, and structured around the assumption that the subject will be transparent, because transparency is what the Jedi expect from children. "Tell us what you see," Mace said. Images on a screen, simple ones. The standard cognitive perception test. He answers them correctly. All of them. Not quickly. He calibrates the response speed to what a prodigy would produce under moderate stress, which is fast but not instantaneous, with small visible efforts that suggest a child working at the edge of his capacity rather than a veteran operating well within his. "Afraid, are you?" Yoda asked. The question dropped into a brief gap between other questions, inserted with the precision of someone who knows exactly where a gap will occur. He considered the honest answer. "Of some things," he said. Yoda's ears moved forward a fraction. The expression beneath them didn't change. "Tell me what you fear," Yoda said. The room was attentive in the way that rooms with 12 Jedi Masters in them are attentive. No shift of posture, no leaning forward. But a quality of focus that was almost atmospheric. He thought about the question with genuine care. He could give the boy's answer, "My mother," being alone, not being enough. All of those were true. He could give the man's answer, "None of those things. Not anymore. Not after everything that burned them out of him." The honest answer was somewhere between. "Failing the people who trust me," he said. "Not having enough time." The words landed. Several masters exchanged the specific non-glance of people communicating without moving. Yoda said. Qui-Gon presented his case afterward, in the chamber, with the masters still seated. He argued with the structured conviction of a Jedi who has made peace with the probability of being outvoted, and is arguing on principle regardless. The midi-chlorian count, the demonstrated force sensitivity, the prophetic resonance, which Qui-Gon introduced carefully, like a man placing weight on ice he hasn't fully tested. Mace's response was what it always was. "The boy is too old," Mace said. "Attachments already formed, emotions already patterned. Training at this stage carries risks the Council is not prepared to assume." He stood in the center of the circle and listened to this with the specific experience of a man hearing his own sentence read. He had heard this argument before, in this room, and he knew its shape, knew where it went, knew the specific truth it contained, and the specific truth it missed. "With respect," Qui-Gon said, and the words had edge to them. "The Force brought this boy to us." "The Force," Mace replied, "does not carry a council vote." Afterward, in the corridor outside the chamber, Qui-Gon walked beside him in silence for long enough that the silence became a statement. The temple's ambient hush pressed in from both sides, the specific, cultivated quiet of a place where noise has been managed architecturally for thousands of years. He waited. "They will not train you," Qui-Gon said. Not gently. Accurately. "I know," he said. The Jedi looked at him sideways. The instrument-checking expression again, more visible here than in the chamber, in the closer quarters of a corridor where there were no other masters to perform neutrality for. "That doesn't trouble you," Qui-Gon observed. Not a question. He thought about how to answer that. The truthful answer was complex. "It troubles me in the way that a wrong note troubles a musician who has already played the piece through once and knows where the wrong note leads." But that answer required more biography than he was prepared to share in a temple corridor. "I think the council is afraid," he said instead. "And I think afraid people make decisions based on what they're afraid of, rather than what they're looking at." Qui-Gon stopped walking. He stopped too, and looked up at the Jedi with the boy's face arranged in the neutral expression of someone who has said something they meant. The silence ran for 4 seconds. "You are 9 years old," Qui-Gon said, with a quality in his voice that wasn't quite bewilderment and wasn't quite wonder but occupied the space adjacent to both. "Yes," he agreed. Qui-Gon looked at him for another moment. Then he began walking again, and his voice when he spoke next was quieter, carrying only as far as the space between them. "I intend to train you regardless of the council's decision," Qui-Gon said. "As my Padawan, you should know that." He walked alongside the Jedi and processed this. In the original sequence of events, this offer had arrived differently, conditional, entangled in the crisis still unfolding on Naboo, spoken with less certainty and more desperation. This version was something else, a choice made cleanly, in a corridor, by a man who had looked at him in a child's body for 3 days and decided, on the weight of his own judgment, that the investment was correct. He felt something move in his chest that was not tactical and not analytical. "Thank you," he said. It came out simply, no performance, no calibration. Qui-Gon nodded once, the way he nodded when a thing was settled. At the far end of the corridor, a window looked out over the upper city. The afternoon light had shifted toward evening, the towers catching it lower on their faces now, the transit lanes beginning to fill with the early movement of Coruscant's night cycle beginning its quiet, planetary rotation. He walked through it beside the man who had just chosen to be responsible for him. The council's answer was no. Qui-Gon's answer was yes. He knew which one would matter. Palpatine's office smells like old power. Not metaphorically. There is a specific quality to rooms that have hosted ambition across decades, a layering of used air, expensive materials, and the particular staleness of spaces where windows are rarely opened, because the occupant prefers controlled environments. The senator from Naboo has occupied this suite in the Republic Executive Quarter for 11 years, and the room has absorbed him the way fabric absorbs a scent. Completely, without remainder. He sits across from Palpatine and keeps his hands in his lap. The senator arrived at this meeting through Qui-Gon's arrangement, a courtesy call. Framed as pastoral concern for a displaced child from Naboo's sector, the kind of meeting powerful men take because the cost of taking it is low, and the political inventory of having taken it is marginally useful. Palpatine had agreed with the warmth of a man who agrees to everything that costs him nothing. He has been in the room for 4 minutes. In that time, Palpatine has offered him tea, asked 2 questions about Tatooine with the practiced interest of someone who has prepared those questions in advance, and positioned himself in the conversational space between authority and intimacy, close enough to feel paternal, formal enough to feel significant. He watches all of it with the interior stillness of a man reading a document he has already memorized. Palpatine is older than he appears and younger than he acts. The public face, the mild senator, the sympathetic statesman, the careful navigator of Republic politics, is a construction of such long standing that most of the man wearing it has forgotten it is a construction. The tells are small. He wouldn't see them without knowing what he was looking for. The precise calibration of warmth, never too much, never too little, always exactly the temperature that produces the desired response in the specific subject. The way the eyes assess rather than engage. The micro pause before emotional responses. the half-second gap where a genuine person's feeling arrives but Palpatine's feeling is selected. He is, at his core, a reader of rooms, a builder of vulnerabilities. He has spent 60 years identifying what people need and positioning himself as the source of it, and the process is by now so automatic that he likely cannot separate the instrument from the man. He cannot read this room. The recognition of that fact arrives in Palpatine's eyes approximately 90 seconds into the meeting, when his second careful question about Tatooine produces a response that is warm, age-appropriate, and contains absolutely nothing exploitable. The senator's expression doesn't change, the warmth doesn't shift, but something recalibrates behind the eyes, a subtle repositioning of approach. The way a navigator adjusts heading when the initial course finds unexpected resistance. He watches the recalibration happen and gives Palpatine nothing. "You must find Coruscant overwhelming," Palpatine said. The third approach. Manufactured common ground, the outsider in the city, the small planet child navigating the capital. A vulnerability most people from peripheral systems carry without knowing it. "It's very large," he agreed. "But I've seen it from above now. Once you understand the layout, it makes sense. Most children your age would find it frightening." "I suppose," he said. "I find it interesting." A beat. Palpatine smiled with the specific warmth of a man recalibrating again. "You are an unusual young man, Anakin." The use of his name. First name, immediate. An intimacy-establishing technique so standard it had a classification in the interrogation protocols he'd reviewed as a military officer. He let it land without reaction. "The Jedi say that," he replied. "I'm not sure what it means yet." "It means," Palpatine said, leaning forward with the practiced move of a man sharing a confidence, "that the people around you may not always understand what you're capable of. That can be lonely." The manufactured loneliness offering. Identify isolation, position yourself as the person who sees past it. He had watched this technique deployed on himself across years. The slow, incremental construction of the belief that Palpatine alone truly understood him. Watching it from outside the target position was something else entirely. Clinical, almost abstract. He looked at Palpatine with the open expression of a boy considering an adult's words seriously. "I have Qui-Gon," he said, "and my mother. I don't feel lonely." The senator's eyes held for a fraction longer than they should have. In the architecture of Palpatine's grooming method, the loneliness offering is a load-bearing element. It requires the subject to have a loneliness to offer against, an unmet need, a felt isolation, a gap between the self the subject projects and the self the subject believes no one sees. Remove the gap, and the offering finds no purchase. He had removed the gap by filling it with the truth. He was not lonely. He had Qui-Gon, who had chosen him in a corridor with the clarity of a man making a decision rather than following a script. He had his mother, alive and free in a way she had never been in his first life. He had the specific, unassailable peace of a man who has already lost everything once and rebuilt his understanding of what matters from the rubble. Palpatine had nothing to offer him. The senator understood this in the way that experienced predators understand when terrain has shifted. He didn't show the understanding. But the next line of approach that emerged was different in quality, less warm, more curious. The manufacturer's interest replaced by something that was more genuinely his own. "The Jedi Council denied your training, I'm told," Palpatine said, slightly harder, testing a different edge. "Qui-Gon disagreed with them," he replied. "Qui-Gon is one man," Palpatine observed. "The Council speaks for the Order. Qui-Gon is training me anyway," he said. Simply, he said it was a matter of conscience. The senator was quiet for 3 seconds. Then the warmth returned, adjusted, recalibrated to a new frequency. "A man of principle," Palpatine said. "Admirable, though it puts you in a complicated position, between your master's judgment and the Council's authority." He looked at Palpatine with the steady attention of a boy who has registered a slightly strange adult comment and is deciding how to receive it. "Not really," he said. "Qui-Gon is there. The Council is somewhere else. When things are complicated, I usually figure out who I trust and start there." The Force moved in the room, not visibly, not with any external marker, but he had spent decades learning to read the Force's texture in the presence of Sith, and Palpatine's careful assessment of him had a specific quality. like fingers testing a lock from outside. Subtle force suggestion, wrapped so carefully in the cadence of normal speech that most Jedi would have felt it as general persuasion rather than targeted manipulation. The suggestions were finding nothing. He watched Palpatine recognize this without being able to explain it. The senator's force touch moved across him with the precision of a practiced instrument, and registered. Nothing. No exploitable fear. No gap in the self-concept. No hunger for recognition that could be fed and then leveraged. The lock had no mechanism that matched the key. He saw, for the first time in the meeting, something that was not warmth and not calculation, but something older and more fundamental shift in Palpatine's eyes. Not fear. Not yet. Attention. The specific quality of attention a predator gives to something it cannot categorize. "You have your mother's directness," Palpatine said, settling back, the warmth fully restored and somehow less convincing for its return. "She raised you well." "She did," he agreed. The meeting concluded shortly after. Pleasantries, offers of future assistance. The standard architecture of a powerful man leaving a door notionally open. He received all of it with the appropriate gratitude and the appropriate deference, and none of the need that would have made any of it useful. In the corridor outside, Qui-Gon fell into step beside him. "How was it?" the Jedi asked. He considered the question. He thought about the assessment he had just conducted, the grooming techniques catalogued, the force suggestions registered and deflected. The specific moment Palpatine's eyes had shifted from predatory to something more genuinely uncertain. "He's very good at making people feel understood," he said. Qui-Gon looked at him with the sideways attention that had become familiar. "Did it work?" the Jedi asked. "No," he said. They walked. The corridor opened onto a gallery that overlooked the Senate district, the great dome of the chamber visible through the transparent steel, its scale designed to make individuals understand their scale. He looked at it without the awe it was designed to produce. "He'll want to meet again," he said. "Likely," Qui-Gon agreed. "We should let him," he said. "But not yet. There's something I need to do first." Qui-Gon didn't ask what. The Jedi had, over 3 days, developed the specific patience of a man who has learned that questions directed at this particular child produce answers that arrive on their own schedule, and are worth waiting for. He watched the Senate dome through the gallery glass and thought about timelines. The crisis on Naboo was still running. Maul was still in the field. Palpatine's plan was still in motion, the machinery of it grinding forward on the schedule he remembered from a different life. He had approximately 60 hours before the critical sequence began. It was enough. The Naboo Royal Starship breaks atmosphere at dawn. From the co-pilot's seat he watches the planet's curvature resolve into the clean geometry of space, the blue-green of Naboo's surface giving way to the hard black above it, stars arriving one at a time as the atmosphere thins, and then all at once as it ends. The transition from sky to void takes 11 seconds. He counts them. Rick Oley is in the pilot's seat running the departure checklist, with the professional focus of a man who takes departure checklists seriously. Qui-Gon is in the cabin behind them. The others are distributed through the ship in the configurations of people who have accepted that what they're doing is dangerous and have organized themselves accordingly. He had been placed in the co-pilot seat because placing him anywhere else had stopped making sense to Qui-Gon 3 days ago. He runs his half of the checklist without being asked. The plan is Padm's, which is correct. She had laid it out in the Queen's Council chamber the previous evening, with the compressed precision of someone who has been thinking about nothing else for days. The ground assault on Theed, the Gungan alliance, the simultaneous push to capture Newt Gunray in the throne room. The tactical logic was sound. The political logic was necessary. The personal cost of it, a queen asking a people her predecessors had condescended to for generations to stand beside her, was the part she had carried in her face during the planning session, and not spoken aloud. He had not offered the space battle component until she finished. When he did, the room had gone quiet in the specific way of people encountering a variable they hadn't accounted for. "The droid control ship," he said. "In orbit. Everything on the ground runs from there. Cut the signal and the droid army stops." "We have no fighter pilots," Rick Oley said. "You have one," he replied. Naboo space is quiet when they arrive. The Trade Federation battleships sit in high orbit in the deployment configuration he remembers. The control ship centered. the support vessels arranged in a loose perimeter that made military sense when the blockade was new and has calcified into habit over the weeks since. The gaps in the perimeter are the same gaps he remembers. The patrol timing is the same timing. He is in the cockpit of a Naboo N-1 starfighter before the Royal Starship finishes its orbital approach. The fighter systems come online under his hands in the sequence that the manual specifies, and that he has known independently since approximately the 4th hour of his first day back in this body. R2-D2 slots into the droid socket behind him. The astromech's greeting whistle is short, businesslike. He responds to it with a 2-fingered tap on the console, an acknowledgement between pilots that requires no translation. "Ready?" he asked. R2's affirmative was immediate. He launches without fanfare. The N-1 exits the hangar bay at standard departure velocity, and then he opens the throttle and the ship's engine note climbs past what the manual recommends, and into the range that the engineers who designed the manual had accounted for, but politely not documented. The stars smear slightly in his peripheral vision. The control ship's position resolves on his scanner as a large, stationary mass in the orbital lane above Theed. Between him and it, 4 Trade Federation Vulture droids on patrol rotation. He studies their pattern for 8 seconds. The Vulture droids of this era fly a 6-point rotation pattern on a 40-second cycle, a defensive configuration designed around the assumption that any attacking fighter will approach from outside the perimeter, and therefore be detected at sufficient range to allow defensive convergence. The assumption has a structural flaw. It doesn't account for an attacker who begins inside the perimeter. He had timed the Royal Starship's orbital approach to deposit him on the interior side of the patrol rotation. He crosses the first patrol leg 30 seconds into the gap between the 3rd and 4th droid's position, running quiet with his fighter's signature profile, minimized by a power distribution adjustment R2 executes, without being asked, because R2 has been working with pilots long enough to recognize the setup. The first Vulture droid doesn't register him until he's past it. He takes the first 2 on the approach vector, clean intercept geometry, the N-1's blaster cannons firing in the short, precise bursts of someone who does not waste ammunition because ammunition is finite, and engagements are not always short. The first droid comes apart at the fuselage junction. The second loses its drive systems and spirals out of the patrol rotation on a trajectory that takes it away from the control ship rather than toward it. The third turns toward him. He rolls the N-1 underneath the incoming fire, not dramatically, not with the excess of motion that wastes energy, but with the minimum necessary displacement that puts the fire a meter above his canopy, and completes the roll already aligned for the shot. The droid takes it in the sensor cluster and goes dark. The fourth breaks toward the control ship, transmitting as it goes. He lets it run for 3 seconds, long enough for the transmission to fail to reach its destination, because R2 has been quietly jamming the local communication band since launch, and then takes it from behind with a single shot to the drive housing. 4 Vulture droids, 31 seconds. The control ship fills his forward viewport. The docking bay approach is not in the manual and is not something he learned from a flight record. It is something he knows from the particular way this engagement ended in a different timeline. A child's podracer instincts and force guidance, sending an N-1 into a docking bay that was never meant to receive it. He had never understood, until now, how narrow that margin actually was. He understands it completely. He brings the fighter in on a flat angle that drops below the bay's defensive gun elevation, a gap in the coverage that exists because the designers never anticipated a manned fighter making this approach at this speed, and the N-1 enters the bay with its wingtip stabilizers, clearing the bay frame by distances he is measuring in real time through the Force and not thinking about too carefully. The bay is not empty. Trade Federation security droids register the unauthorized entry and begin their targeting sequence, which takes 4 seconds for this model. He has the fighter's cannons on the primary reactor coolant manifold before the 3rd second completes. The shot is not intended to destroy the reactor. A destroyed reactor on a ship this size produces an explosion that would compromise the docking bay and with it his exit. The shot is calibrated to the coolant manifold specifically, a targeted failure that will cascade to the reactor's power distribution network and cut the primary signal transmission to the droid army on the surface below in approximately 90 seconds. He learned this from an engineering assessment he commissioned as a military officer, years after the battle, when understanding the specific mechanics of the engagement had become professionally relevant. R2 chirps a sharp warning. He had already moved. The secondary blast from the coolant rupture pushes outward from the manifold in the direction he had calculated, and he is 7 meters perpendicular to that direction before the pressure wave arrives. The fighter rocks. The structural integrity holds. The reactor's power distribution network fails on schedule. In the docking bay's sudden emergency lighting, he sits in the cockpit and gives himself 4 seconds to feel the hum of an N1 that has survived this, and the specific private knowledge that 90 seconds ago a signal stopped reaching the surface of Naboo, and the droid army down there has begun the slow, sequential shutdown that starts at the command units and works outward. R2 makes a quiet, satisfied sound. "Good work," he said. The astromech's response was a short, ascending whistle. Agreement. Mutual acknowledgement between two beings who have done this kind of thing before and know what it costs and are glad it's done. He powers the fighter's systems to standby and checks the bay's structural readings on his scanner. The secondary explosion has compromised 2 of the 4 exit vectors. The other 2 are clear. He has the exit already planned. The same flat angle in reverse, wingtips clearing the same frame, the exterior deployment of the Royal Starship waiting in the orbital position he asked Rick Oley to hold. Below him, on Naboo's surface, the ground battle is reaching its own conclusions. He doesn't need to be there for those. Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan are there. Padmé's there. The people who belong to those moments are present for them. His part was this: the signal cut, the 90-second cascade, the specific mechanical intervention that stops a war without requiring the war to be won the hard way. He begins his exit sequence. R2 whistles once more, low and long, the sound the astromech makes when something has gone right that had no business going right. He knew the feeling. The Theed generator complex announces itself through the floor. He feels it before he sees it, the deep, subsonic vibration of the plasma reactor running at full capacity beneath the city, conducting upward through the stone streets and into the soles of his boots as he moves through Theed's outer corridors at a pace that is not quite running, because running in these corridors produces noise, and noise produces contact, and contact with Trade Federation security units right now is a cost he isn't prepared to pay. He knows this building, not from schematics, from memory, from a version of events that ended differently, that ended with a funeral pyre on a planet whose name he cannot think about yet. That ended with Qui-Gon Jinn becoming the reason Obi-Wan Kenobi took on a Padawan he wasn't ready for. He knows the generator complex the way a man knows the site of an accident he has replayed 10,000 times. Every junction, every blast door, every vertical drop in the reactor shaft. He moves through it without hesitation. He hears the lightsabers before he reaches the hangar entrance. 2 distinct tones, Qui-Gon's green blade carrying the lower register, Maul's red running a half-step higher with the particular frequency of a synth crystal pushed to maximum output. The duel is already inside the generator complex. The timeline is running exactly as he remembers it running, which means the ray shield partitions are active, which means Obi-Wan is separated, which means Qui-Gon is alone. He goes through the hangar at a run. The generator room opens below the entrance gantry in the same configuration he has seen in his memory 1,000 times, the reactor shaft dropping away in the center, the catwalk system running around its circumference, and the ray shield partition corridor running along the eastern wall where right now, in this moment, Darth Maul and Qui-Gon Jinn are fighting in the gap between 2 active partitions with Obi-Wan Kenobi trapped 3 sections back, separated by charged fields he cannot cross. He takes in the geometry in 2 seconds. Maul is faster than he remembered. Not faster than memory in the way of imperfect recollection, faster than the accounts suggested. The Zabrak moves with a fluidity that comes from total physical integration, the double-bladed saber a continuous motion rather than a series of strikes, offense and defense unified into a single flowing system. Qui-Gon is holding. The Jedi's defense is measured, precise, the long sweeping blocks of Ataru redirected into tighter movements, because the corridor doesn't give him room for the full form's expression. He is holding. He will not hold indefinitely. He finds the shield generator panel on the gantry wall and reaches into it with the force. The partition system runs on a sequential power cycling protocol, each field maintained by a dedicated capacitor bank that recharges on a 12-second cycle, which is why in the original sequence the fighters had to wait at each partition for the field to drop. The capacitor banks are connected through a distribution conduit that runs behind the panel to his left. The conduit has 3 junction points. He takes hold of all 3 simultaneously. The force work is precise, not dramatic, nothing visible from the corridor below. A man sitting quietly at a gantry railing with his eyes unfocused and his hands in his lap, doing something that looks like nothing and is the equivalent of reaching inside a running engine and rerouting its power flow with his fingers. All 3 partition fields collapse at once. The change in the room is immediate. Obi-Wan moves first. The Padawan's first instinct is forward, toward his master, and he comes through the now clear corridor at a sprint. Maul registers the partition collapse a half-second later, and his combat geometry adjusts. The Zabrak's eyes moving from Qui-Gon to the suddenly open corridor and back, recalculating threats, because 2 opponents is a different problem than 1. Then Maul looks up. He meets the yellow eyes from the gantry above. Maul's expression does something complicated in the 2 seconds of stillness before the geometry reshapes. It isn't fear. The Zabrak doesn't have enough information for fear. It is the Predator's specific recalculation when an environment it understood 1 second ago has acquired a new variable it doesn't have a classification for. A child on a gantry. A child who collapsed 3 ray shield partitions simultaneously without visible effort. A child whose force presence, Maul is now discovering, does not resolve correctly into the profile of anything he has been trained to fight. He drops from the gantry. The fall is 4 meters, and he lands with the force absorbing the impact through his legs in the way it does when you let it, rather than fighting it. A piece of body mechanics that looks effortless because it is, when you've been doing it for 20 years. Maul turns toward him. "No," he said. The word was quiet, not a command, a clarification. He raised one hand, palm outward, with the particular gesture of someone defining the parameters of an engagement, rather than opening one. "You're not dying today," he continued. "Neither is he." Maul's eyes moved to Qui-Gon, to Obi-Wan now at his master's side, back to the child who had just landed 4 meters below his starting point without a lightsaber and without apparent concern. The fight that followed was not a duel in any formal sense. Maul attacked, because Maul was built to attack, and because standing still while 2 Jedi and an anomaly reorganized themselves was tactically worse than pressing the engagement. The double blade came around in a horizontal sweep aimed at the closest target, which was him, with the full committed power of a Zabrak warrior who has been trained since childhood to end fights in the first exchange. He stepped inside the sweep, not blocked it, stepped inside the arc of it, inside the radius where the blade couldn't complete its trajectory, and redirected the incoming force of it with both hands, in the specific way you redirect a rotational strike when you have no weapon of your own, and therefore cannot afford to meet force with force. The momentum carried Maul a step past him. He used the step. A force push from directly behind Maul's center of gravity, not massive, not the kind that moves Durasteel doors, but precisely timed to the moment when Maul's weight was already committed forward, which turned the push into a trip rather than a shove. The Zabrak went forward onto the catwalk with the specific surprise of a fighter whose balance was compromised by something he didn't see coming. Qui-Gon was already moving. The Jedi's blade came in from the right, and Obi-Wan's from the left simultaneously. Not a killing strike. Both of them had heard the word no, and understood its weight somehow, through the force or through the specific authority it had carried, and what they did instead was disarm. Qui-Gon's blade severed the double saber's right hilt connection. Obi-Wan's flick strike took the upper blade entirely. Maul caught himself on the catwalk and came upright immediately, which was impressive. He was already behind the Zabrak with a force grip around his arms, binding them at the elbows, not crushing, not damaging, but absolute in the way that a grip sustained by concentration rather than muscle can be absolute when the concentration is sufficient. Maul tested it. Once, then went still with the dignity of a warrior assessing the arithmetic of a situation that has run out of options. The aftermath had the quality of a room decompressing. Obi-Wan stood with his blade still active, breathing hard, his eyes moving between Maul and the child who was holding Maul immobile with what appeared to be no particular effort. The Padawan's expression cycled through several registrations in rapid succession, relief, confusion, And then the specific suspended uncertainty of someone who has run out of frameworks and is waiting for a new one to be offered. Qui-Gon deactivated his blade. The Jedi looked at him with the expression that had been building across 6 days of recalibration. Every instrument check, every corridor conversation, every moment of a child saying something that a child had no business saying. And what was in the expression now was past the careful measuring and into something simpler. He simply looked. "You knew," Qui-Gon said. Not an accusation. Not even a question. A man arriving at a statement he has been walking toward for several days. "I knew," he said. Maul was bound between them. The generator room hummed beneath everything. Somewhere above, through the complex's structure, the sounds of the ground battle were reaching their conclusions. He looked at Qui-Gon, alive, standing, breathing, his blade hand steady, and felt something in his chest complete a circuit it had been reaching across a lifetime to close. "There's one more fight," he said. "But it doesn't need a lightsaber." Qui-Gon held his gaze for a moment longer. "Tell me," the Jedi said. He looked at Obi-Wan, at the bound Maul, at the Jedi who was alive, because today the geometry had been different, because someone had arrived who knew where to stand. "Not here," he said. "Somewhere with a terminal. And time." He had both. The briefing room in Theed Palace has one long table, 8 chairs, and a terminal that connects to the Republic holonet with the encryption clearance of a sovereign government. He uses all of it. The table has Qui-Gon at one end and Obi-Wan to his left, and Captain Panaka standing by the door, because Panaka is the kind of security professional who stands by doors during briefings as a matter of structural instinct. Padmé is present in her own capacity now, not the handmaiden, not the performance of the handmaiden, but the Queen of Naboo, sitting at her own table in her own palace with the specific authority of someone who has just fought through her own city to reclaim it, and is not done yet. Maul is elsewhere, restrained, conscious, and under guard in a room 3 floors down that Panaka had selected for its limited egress options. He stands at the terminal. He begins with Maul. Not because Maul is the largest piece, he isn't, but because Maul is the piece that cannot be explained away. A Zabrak warrior with a double-bladed lightsaber, trained in the Sith combat tradition that the Jedi Order has not encountered in 1,000 years. A being who infiltrated Tatooine, tracked a Jedi Master across 2 systems, and engaged 2 Jedi Knights simultaneously in a generator complex, while holding his own for several minutes. Maul exists. Maul is 3 floors down. Maul is not an argument or an allegation. He pulls the Republic Criminal Database entry first. Maul has none, which is itself information. A being with Maul's combat capability who has no record in the Republic security apparatus is a being who has been actively maintained outside that apparatus. Ghosts on this scale require infrastructure. The Sith operate in pairs, he said. 1 master, 1 apprentice. Maul is the apprentice. He paused. The master is someone the Republic already knows. Qui-Gon's expression was still. Obi-Wan had leaned forward 3 minutes into the briefing and hadn't leaned back. The financial records are the second piece, he continued. The slicing had taken 40 minutes the previous night, running on a borrowed terminal in the Royal Starship while the others slept. He had known what he was looking for, which made the search shorter than it would have been for anyone approaching the data without prior knowledge. The Trade Federation's financing for the Naboo blockade ran through 4 shell companies before it reached its origin point. The origin point was a discretionary fund attached to a Republic Senate emergency appropriation from 6 years prior. The appropriation had been sponsored by Senator Sheev Palpatine of Naboo. He puts the financial chain on the display. All 4 layers, clearly labeled, the terminal tracing the money backward from the Trade Federation's operational accounts to the Senate appropriation with the impersonal clarity of documented fact. The room was quiet. Padmé looked at the display with the expression of someone feeling the specific vertigo of a pattern resolving that has been present around her for years without becoming visible. Her planet. Her crisis. Her senator, whom she had trusted, whom her predecessors had trusted, who had used both the trust and the crisis as instruments. He manufactured it, she said. Her voice was steady. The steadiness cost something. The blockade. The invasion. The sympathy vote in the Senate, he He nodded. All of it. The crisis that would make Naboo's senator the face of Republic suffering. The Senate vote of no confidence in Valorum that would clear the path for a new chancellor. His own election. Palpatine, Qui-Gon said. The word arrived differently than it had before, the name reconstructed from its familiar shape into something that carried weight. Darth Sidious, he said. The Sith Master. Obi-Wan stood up. Not dramatically, the Padawan was too disciplined for drama, but the sitting position had stopped being adequate for what he was processing, and his body made the adjustment automatically. He moved to the display and studied the financial chain with the focused attention of a man trying to find the error in the logic that would make this not be true. He didn't find one. The timing, Obi-Wan said. The vote of no confidence was called the day after the invasion reached the Senate floor. By Padmé, he said, who was guided to call it by Palpatine's own council. Padmé's hands were flat on the table. He told me it was the only option. It was the only option he offered you, he said. There were others. He made sure you didn't see them. The silence that followed had a different texture than the silences earlier in the briefing. This one had the quality of something structural settling. The sound a building makes when a load-bearing element has been identified, and the people inside are adjusting their understanding of what's holding the ceiling up. Qui-Gon had not moved from his end of the table. How do you know this? The Jedi asked. The question had been building since the generator room. It had been building since the esplanade on Tatooine. It had been building since a child in a starting cockpit had looked at a midi-chlorian reading with the eyes of someone who already knew the number. He looked at Qui-Gon across the table. I know it, he said. I will explain it fully. But not before we use it, because the window for using it is closing, and the explanation takes longer than the window. Qui-Gon held his gaze for 4 seconds. Then the Jedi nodded once, with the deliberate quality of a man choosing to extend credit he may not recover. What do we need? Qui-Gon asked. They needed Chancellor Valorum's direct channel, which Padmé had through the Queen's sovereign diplomatic protocols, a head of state's direct line to the Supreme Chancellor, bypassing the Senate apparatus entirely, and therefore bypassing every loyalist Palpatine had positioned within it. They needed the financial documentation formatted for Senate presentation, which the terminal produced in 40 minutes. They needed Maul transported to Coruscant under Jedi custody as physical evidence, which Panica organized with the efficiency of a security chief who has been waiting for a use for a prisoner. And they needed someone the Senate would believe before Palpatine could construct a counter-narrative. They had Qui-Gon, who was a Jedi Master with an unimpeachable record and no political affiliations that could be leveraged against him. They had Padmé, who was the queen of the planet the crisis had been built around, presenting evidence of her own manipulation with the specific moral authority of a victim who has done her own accounting. They had the financial records, which did not require belief because they were documented fact in 5 independent database systems that would take months to scrub and were already in Senate hands before scrubbing could begin. And they had Maul, who was alive and in custody because he had said no in a generator room and meant it, and whose existence was the single most catastrophic piece of physical evidence a Sith Lord's millennium-long concealment could face. The sequence moved fast once it moved. Valorum acted within 6 hours of receiving the documentation directly through the Queen's channel. The Supreme Chancellor was a man whose political authority had been eroding for years under the precise pressure Palpatine had applied to it, and who recognized, upon receiving a complete documented account of how and why that erosion had been engineered, that the window for decisive action was brief, and the cost of hesitation was everything. He issued the emergency security order with the speed of a man who understood that speed was the only move left. Bail Organa of Alderaan Co. sponsored the Senate emergency session at Valorum's direct request. The financial documentation entered the public record through the Chancellor's office, before Palpatine's own office received formal notification that a session had been called. Because the documentation had never passed through any channel Palpatine's people controlled. He watched the sequencing from the briefing room terminal and tracked the timestamps. The first news transmission carried the financial chain. The second carried Maul's confirmed identity as a Sith-trained combatant, verified by 3 Jedi Masters who had examined him in custody. The third carried Padmé's personal account of the counsel she had received and the options she had not been shown. By the fourth transmission, The narrative Palpatine had spent 11 years constructing had developed the specific kind of fractures that do not repair because they are structural. In the Republic Executive Quarter on Coruscant, in an office that smelled like old power and controlled environments and 60 years of manufactured warmth, Sheev Palpatine sat alone and read the transmissions as they arrived. He dropped nothing. His posture didn't shift. His expression moved through the transmissions with the mechanical steadiness of a man whose external presentation has been separated from his internal state for so long that the separation is automatic. He read to the end of the fourth transmission. Then he set the datapad down on the desk with the careful, deliberate motion of someone who understands that the next movement matters and should be chosen rather than made by default. The mask came off. Not physically. But in the privacy of the office, with no audience to perform for, the warmth drained out of his face like water from a tilted vessel. And what remained was what had always been underneath. Ancient, patient, furious in the way of a thing that has not experienced genuine obstruction in decades, and is now identifying the shape of what produced this one. The boy. Not the council. Not Valorum. Not the Organa political machinery, or the Naboo Queen's testimony. Those were instruments. Instruments did not reconfigure the engagement on their own. Instruments required someone to pick them up and point them. The boy had known. About Maul. About the financial chain. About the timing. A child from Tatooine with no political education and no intelligence access and no possible source for any of it, had arrived in the middle of a plan 60 years in the making, and had understood it well enough to dismantle it in 72 hours. His eyes moved to the window. Coruscant security units were visible in the plaza below, moving with the organized purpose of people who have received an order and are carrying it out. Moving toward this building. He opened his desk's lower drawer. His lightsaber was where it always was. Palpatine moves like what he is. The warmth is gone entirely now. The careful senator, the paternal statesman, the manufactured concern for a displaced child from a peripheral system. All of it stripped away in the moment the desk drawer opened, and what crossed the office floor toward the door was something that had been wearing those things the way a person wears a coat. Functional. Removable. Never the body underneath. The red blade ignites in the corridor. Mace Windu is already there. He had sent the transmission 4 hours ago. A single encrypted message through Qui-Gon's Council channel, addressed to Mace directly, containing the financial documentation, Maul's confirmed identity, and 4 words at the end that he had chosen with care. He will run tonight. Mace had not replied. Mace didn't need to reply. The Korun Master had been on a transport within the hour. And now he stands in the executive quarter corridor with his purple blade active and the expression of a man who has spent his entire adult life preparing for an enemy he was told no longer existed. Obi-Wan is to his left. Qui-Gon to his right. 3 Jedi. 1 corridor. 1 Sith Lord who has no more use for the corridor than he has for the mask. He stands at the corridor's far end and watches. Palpatine is extraordinary. He knows this. He has always known this, has felt it across a different version of this life in the way you feel the gravity of something massive, not as a discrete sensation, but as a constant pressure that warps everything around it. The Sith Master is 6 decades of perfected technique expressed through a body that the dark side has been reinforcing since before most of the people in this corridor were born. He fights with 2 objectives simultaneously, causing damage and reaching the exit at the corridor's far end, where a shuttle bay gives him the stars, and the stars give him everything. Mace doesn't let him reach the exit. The purple blade intercepts Palpatine's first movement with the specific economy of Vapad, a form that meets aggression with aggression, that feeds on the dark side's own output and returns it, that requires the practitioner to have stared into themselves long enough to know exactly what's there and have made peace with it. Mace has made that peace. It shows in every line of his form. Palpatine redirects. Obi-Wan cuts off the angle. Qui-Gon takes the left. 3 simultaneous engagement vectors against a single opponent who can only cover 2 at once, and the mathematics of it are what they are regardless of individual capability. He watches Palpatine solve the problem with something close to professional appreciation. The Sith Master is faster than he should be at this age, flowing between the three blades with a footwork precision that speaks to 10,000 hours of drilling in rooms no one knew existed. He gives ground deliberately, buying time, looking for the gap that three coordinated opponents leave when they move together rather than independently. He doesn't find it. Qui-Gon forces an overextension on the third exchange, a committed strike that Palpatine must meet or absorb, and when Palpatine meets it, his right side opens for exactly the duration of a single counter-movement. Mace takes it. The purple blade catches Palpatine's weapon hand. The red lightsaber drops. Obi-Wan's blade is at the Sith Lord's throat before the weapon completes its fall. And the fight ends the way fights end when the arithmetic runs out, not with drama, but with the quiet, final geometry of a position that has no remaining moves. Palpatine looks at the three blades surrounding him with the expression of a man calculating and finding nothing to calculate. Then he looks past them. At the child at the far end of the corridor, he meets the eyes. Whatever Palpatine was expecting to find in a 9-year-old's face, fear, triumph, the hunger of someone who has won something, he doesn't find it. He finds what has been there since a starting grid on Tatooine, since an elevator in the Senate Quarter, since a briefing room in Theed Palace, a stillness that has no business in a child's expression, a patience that belongs to someone who has already been through the long version of this and is standing at its end with no particular need to perform what that means. Palpatine's eyes move over his face and find nothing to use. The calculation ends. Mace and Obi-Wan bind the Sith Lord's hands. Qui-Gon retrieves the dropped lightsaber with the care of a man handling documented evidence, which is exactly what it is. Coruscant security fills the corridor behind them, and the process of ending 6 decades of institutional concealment begins with the procedural normality of an arrest, forms, identification, custody transfer documentation. He turns and walks toward the exit. He doesn't look back. The council chamber 3 days later has the quality of a room that has reassessed itself. 12 seats, 12 masters, the same afternoon light through the same curved transparent steel panels. He stands in the center ring again. The geometry is identical to the first time. The room is not. Yoda speaks first, which is different. "Shown us much you have," the ancient master said. "Grateful the order is." He waited. "The vote was taken this morning," Mace said. His voice had a quality it hadn't carried in the first session, not warmth exactly, but the specific adjustment of a man revising a position on the basis of evidence. "The council offers you a place in the order. Full training. Whatever irregularities of age or circumstance applied before. The council considers them addressed." The offer sat in the center of the room. He looked at each face in the circle. Mace. Ki-Adi-Mundi. Plo Koon. Yoda at the far arc, ears slightly forward, watching with the attention of a being who already knows what the answer is, and is waiting to see if the person giving it knows too. "I'm grateful," he said. Genuinely, he paused. "I'm going to decline." The room received this without immediate response. He continued before the silence could become an argument. "I spent a long time belonging to something larger than myself," he said. "I believed in it. I gave everything I had to it, and it gave me everything it could, and neither of us was wrong for trying." He looked at the floor for a moment, then back up. "But I've learned something about the difference between duty and choice. The Order needs Jedi who are there because it's what they are. That's not what I am anymore." He looked at Qui-Gon, who was seated in the chamber as an invited master for this session. "I'm someone's student," he said, "and someone's son. And maybe something else, eventually. When I've had time to find out what I'm actually like when nobody needs saving." Yoda made a small sound. Not disagreement. Something adjacent to approval, wrapped in the compressed syntax of a being who has watched enough lives complete their arcs to recognize when one has found its right shape. "Chosen well, you have," Yoda said. Mace looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded. Not the nod of a man conceding a point, but the nod of a man recognizing a distinction he hadn't expected to respect and finding that he does. "The offer remains open," Mace said. "If that ever changes." "Thank you," he said. "It won't." Naboo in the years after the occupation heals the way places heal when the people who live in them decide to, slowly at first. Then with the quiet momentum of communities that have remembered what they're for. He and his mother settle in a small house in the Lake Country, in the hills above Theed where the mornings are cool and the water reflects the sky, and the nearest neighbor is far enough away that the silence has texture. Shmi plants things. He fixes things. Ships, engines, agricultural machinery, the whole spectrum of mechanical need that a region in recovery generates. He is good at it in the way that someone is good at something when they have both the knowledge and the patience for it, and the patience is no longer provisional. He is not a Jedi. He is not a slave. He is not a soldier or a weapon or an instrument of anything larger than the life in front of him. He is, for the first time in 2 lives, simply present. The years move. He is 17 when Padmé returns to Naboo for a diplomatic summit and finds him in the hills above Theed, fixing a water reclamation unit for a farm collective, covered in mineral residue and completely unbothered by this. She looks at him with the specific expression of someone encountering a person they expected to know and discovering they know someone different and better. They talk for 3 hours that afternoon. They talk for longer the next day. He does not love her the way a tragedy loves its other half. He loves her the way people love each other, when they have both arrived whole, without the weight of what the other person needs to save them from, without the particular desperation of 2 people reaching for each other across an abyss. It is quieter than the version he remembers. It is better in every way that matters. On a morning in the hill country, years further on, he sits on the steps of the small house while the light comes up over the water and listens to the sound of his mother moving inside, the familiar domestic sounds of a person living an ordinary life that no one is trying to take from her. He breathes. In, out, clean air, moving through lungs that have never needed machinery, the same lungs that gasped in a starting cockpit above a Tatooine grid and found themselves impossibly free. He closes his eyes. The Force is quiet around him, not absent, never absent, but resting the way it rests around people who are not in the middle of something it needs them for. It has nothing to ask of him this morning. He has nothing to ask of it. He simply breathes, and the morning comes up over the water, and the house behind him is warm with the sounds of people who are alive and intend to stay that way. That is enough. That has always been enough. He just needed 2 lives to learn it. Let us know what you'd like to see next. The end.